He's going to talk about this in a moment. Voy a empezar.
Question that is, you finally finished your film as a producer. Now what? What's the outline, the basic route that you have to do in order to get the distribution of your film?
Well, I think the chosen and proven path has been sort of the festival route. That's the first thing that's going to be on your mind is how are you going to expose your film now to audiences and to buyers around the world. And so you target some of the most acclaimed festivals around the world. Sundance happens to be one of them. But so is Toronto, and so is Cannes, and so is Venice, and so is Berlin. And you try to get your films into those festivals, and that's where that's the best environment for buyers in the U.S. and everywhere else around the world to see your film.
Okay, and talking more about theatrical release in the U.S.
You want to just get past Plan A, and then
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know, you want to try and target some of the better festivals, because I used to for 17 years I worked in acquisitions. I was a buyer for both New Line and Warner Brothers, and I would go to all the festivals and a lot of festivals and buy films to distribute in the States. Obviously, if I wanted to, I could travel year-round going to festivals, you know. But no, you're going to target the most competitive festivals, and in that sense, buyers like me, sort of, you know, I mean, that's a way for the festival programmers to get the cream of the crop. I mean, sometimes there are movies that can fail the program, that or whatever that come out and are successful, but for the most part, the cream of the crop are at those festivals. And so I go to those festivals, I look for films to buy, so a lot of our competitors, IFC, Sony Classics, all the usual roadside attractions, all the usual suspects in the US. Ideally, you want one of those companies to buy your film and distribute it in the States. You get, I don't know, we were just talking about this on the way over, and I'm not sure what the last Colombian film was that was distributed in the States, and if anybody knows, I would love to, just shout it out. But the only ones I could sort of think of, I mean, obviously, there's a couple of Chilean films that have been pretty hot lately. I mean, you could have different. You have a couple different examples. You have a movie like Pablo Larraín's No, you know, which is nominated for an Oscar and gets distributed by Sony Pictures Classics and goes on to make $2.5 million in the U.S. On the other, and then there's the other end of the spectrum, and this isn't even completely the other end of the spectrum. There's Sebastian Silva's movie The Maids, which was distributed a while ago by Elephant Eye, I believe, and that grossed about $250,000. Okay, some of them will be distributed by IFC or what other, you know, even smaller distributors and gross 40, but at least, you know, you have somebody that's working on the distribution of your film in the States, and they're presumably trying the best they can to find an audience for your movie, whether it's theatrical, which is usually sort of a loss leader, meaning you don't make your money back theatrical usually, but also on the ancillary markets, which is now on VOD, digital, DVD, all the way down the line. So that's the ideal. You know, I mean, obviously it only happens to a handful of movies a year in the States.
Okay, so that's the
holy grail.
Yeah, but it's not for everyone.
No.
So Donald, why don't you tell us a little bit more about QUADFLIX and this other way to do the things? with distribution?
English or Spanish, whichever.
English, I think
Okay.
is better.
Just to add to what Paul said, every Colombian filmmaker, everybody sitting here in the room, should have a dream of making a great movie and getting it bought by one of the top 6, 7, 8 distributors in North America, and that would be choice number one, and you would be a winner, and you would be the happiest person in the world. When Plan A doesn't work, and remember again, Plan A is what we all should aim for, but there is so many competitors, in addition to yourselves, trying to get a film made and bought and distributed by Plan A, that you have to think of alternative strategies, because nobody in this room should be discouraged from making a film. But before you make that film, before you spend the first peso or dollar, you have to think of what is going to be the future of this film after you've dedicated probably 2 years or more of your life to this project. If you don't do that, you're not being fair to yourself and to the crew that's investing their lives and time into this project. One other statistic to put yourself into the real world. Paul mentioned a few markets and festivals. If we take just 2 of them in the last 6 months, one called Sundance in January, one called Tribeca in New York. Those are 2 of many festivals. Between those 2 festivals, there were more than 10,000 films submitted, full-length feature films and full-length documentaries. And between the 2 festivals, 200 films were accepted, 130 in Sundance and 89 in Tribeca. So from 10,000 plus films, 200 were submitted and accepted. And out of the 200, approximately 30 to 40 films got distribution with money. What about the other thousands of people? And let's identify with them, because most of us are going to be in that group. Well, with the world changing, as filmmakers, you've seen the change from film, analog to digital. The same thing is happening in the distribution side of the business. Theaters, I am only speaking about North America. I don't know the Latin American theatrical exposition business. But theaters in the United States are closing. As a rule, they're not opening. People are going to the theater less and less and watching films on different modes of viewing, whether it's their iPad, their smartphone, their TV, their computer, streaming, downloading, cable, and that's where people are seeing, the majority of people are seeing films, and that's what you have to think about. How do you get there? And one of the things that helps you get there are programs, as Santiago asked me to explain. One program that I'm familiar with is called QUADFLIX. And QUADFLIX is a theatrical release program where we approach, and we are approached by people around the world. We've been in business for about less than 2 years, trying to be a solution, or one of the solutions, to filmmakers who don't get their film bought by Plan A. And probably there are 90% of people who don't get their film bought by Plan A, and 10% or less that get their film bought. So let's talk about the 90%. Theoretically, you would submit a film, we would accept it or reject it. The rejection rate has been about 4 out of 5 films have been rejected. And the reason that they're rejected are for many reasons, But mostly the one that we're talking about today is how do I get people to see my film? What's the market? How do I get an audience? And in order to get that audience, after the circuit of film festivals, we believe that a theatrical release in a major, recognized, independent art house theater in a city like New York, where it gets a week's exhibition, 35 screenings, it gets publicity, it gets reviews in the media, and then after the week, hopefully it will then go on to the digital platforms and onto the cable platforms, and then into DVD form and sold online and through retail stores until DVDs are no longer bought. And that's the QUADFLIX program, which is being called self-distribution, where you partner with an organization that helps you bring your film to the market, to eyeballs, and to income.
Okay, but it's really that easy to follow that step. First the theatrical, and then if you are sure that you have this theatrical release, it's really that easy to take those steps towards VOD, cable, and the other platforms?
I think, you know, I mean, I think QUADFLIX Flex is a great program. It's a great option for people. But I think that if you're going to take on this sort of self-distribution mode, I mean, you really have to realize that you're in, you know, I mean, if you're going to try to do it for, I mean, milk it for all it's worth, you're in for working for another, you know, you're going to put off your next movie for a good 8 months to a year, and you're going to work on distributing this movie, which means, I mean, releasing the film at the Quad and getting a New York Times review is great, but that's just the first step. I mean, Donald's program can get you into a lot, 11 digital platforms as well. But, you know, those platforms have matured so fast. So it's about, like, you can be on iTunes, but you're one of thousands of movies that is on iTunes. So how are people going to find your movie? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like in this, I mean, there was a recent study that purports, I should say, and it's just, I don't know how true it is, but purports that the Latino audience in the US is a $1 trillion audience. I'm not saying that's, you know, like, there are complications with that. I mean, it's not as homogenous as African-American audience or gay audiences, or, you know, because they're different. There's Mexican, you know, there's a whole bunch of different Latino cultures that have made the U.S. their home. So it's harder to target them as a mass. But there will be in the future one of these movies that comes out that does, I think, hit, you know, is zeitgeist and sort of hits that market. But it's going to require a lot of elbow grease. It means I'm talking about a lot of social media. I'm talking about even hiring beyond the distribution, and it starts with the distribution, and it starts actually 5 months before the distribution at the Quad. You know, you want to probably going to think about hiring a publicist, social media experts. I mean, you're going to, you know, I mean, that's what's required. So it's going to be, and then there's still no guarantee. In fact, most films do not find an audience. As a distributor, certainly I have successes and failures at Warner Brothers, but when I started my own distribution company afterwards and had a digital distribution with Warner Brothers, deal with Warner Brothers, I would distribute a movie in 50 markets and still see under $10,000 in revenue from digital. And I think that for a lot of people, and these are movies that, this is a movie that's 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It got that got all the requisite reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and they were all great. And they still, you know, so I think there are a lot of people, I think it starts also, you know, a lot of people thinking about who is the audience of the movie, who is the audience for your movie, and satisfying that audience. I think a lot of filmmakers don't really put that much thought. You know, they have the movie they want to make and a movie they want to see, but they don't know that everybody else wants to see that movie. You know?
We were discussing before we started today's talk, what motivates a Colombian filmmaker to make a film? Because if there was one answer or a few answers, it would probably help us in being able to give you some information and some insight into the future of Colombian filmmaking. But if I were to take a guess and say that a good filmmaker has a good story that he feels is universal, it's not just for a Colombian audience, and hopefully, as Paul said, we've got a huge Latino audience in America of many different countries, but somos todo americanos. And I include many people that I know who are Americans, who are interested in stories, films, and opportunities to learn about the Latino life, history, and issues of importance. So it's not only in theory the trillion dollar market or the 40 million Latinos, but there's also an awful lot of English-speaking, non-Spanish-speaking audiences that are hungry for good movies. And those movies can be done in Spanish or Portuguese from Brazil with subtitles. And there is a large market, not hundreds of millions of people, but there is a large market for the kinds of independent films that I think should be and will be made in Colombia that can be paid for and watched in an American home, living room, or in a theater, or on a computer in an airport. And the real question is, what is the expectations that you filmmakers have once your film is made? Do you want it to get seen in North America? Or is it more for your domestic population? Is it for the region, for the Andean market? Is it for Europe? These are distinct questions that one should keep in mind when you're creating your story and making your film. Who is your audience, and how are you going to get to that audience? If plan A happens for you, you don't have to worry about any of this. But don't plan on plan A happening. You've got to start on day one thinking about plan B.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I feel like I understand why why filmmakers here want to make films, and once you make the film, if plan A happens, if you get into these festivals and you get bought, that's great. I think the real question you have to ask yourself is, if that doesn't happen, what next? I mean, how much time and energy are you really going to be put into getting your film distributed either in the U.S. or Europe, or by other means? And there are plenty of acquisition executives in all these countries whose business it is to sort of comb through all the movies and try to find any movies that have at least a potential for commercial success. So to some degree, yes, there are mistakes. People make mistakes. If anybody had a perfect record, there'd only be one distributor. But when you talk about your film being passed over by most, do you know what I mean? Like you should really hear that and say, like, look, and it's not necessarily a bad movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. It's a crowded marketplace, and there's 20 independent. There's 20. I mean, forget Hollywood. There's 20 independent films that are released every weekend. You know what I mean? So even good films, like I said, get released and don't make any money. So it's it's how much effort are you going to put, do you want to put in getting your film distributed, or trying to find an audience for it after, you know, after plan A doesn't work out. And plan A is effortless to some degree. You know what I mean? Like you apply to the festivals and hopefully, you know, there's some work, there's some pushing, there's some, you know, maybe you go to South by Southwest or some of the second tier festivals that you can still jump and make and get your film bought by a distributor. But after that, like how much do you really want to work for that? And how much, you know, like you really are looking to have lightning strike, you know? And by the way, the other thing I think is that I agree with, there's a huge, you know, despite this purported $20 trillion market, Latino market, by far the Latinos and, you know, Latino market in the US wants to see Dark Knight, wants to see Spider-Man, wants to see all the mainstream movies. That's why the movies that have come from even, you know, from Latin America have always had, there's more of a thirst for them in Europe than they are, even with that huge kind of market in the States, there's more of a thirst for them in Europe. Still, the thirst in the States is gonna be an art house market, you know? I mean, this is going back a ways, but Y Tu Mama Tambien, that movie I think grossed around $10 million, which was a lot of money, a huge amount of money at time for that film. And Bob Burney released it at the time, I think he was at IFC, and he released it. And I think, you know, they tried desperately to reach out to Latino audiences for that movie. And I think they got a little, but by far, the reason that movie grossed $10 million is repeat art house viewers. So people like me, people that go to art house movies went to see it twice. You know, that kind of thing. It wasn't the Latino market in the US. So that, I mean, I still think, I mean, hope springs eternal, and I think that there is a movie out there, there will be a movie out there that will break into that market, but it's not happening yet. That's all I'm saying.
No, I just want to put you guys in the situation of the Colombian producer, that as you just said, it's not going to happen that fast, like have their films theatrical released in the US. For example, in Colombia, we do have a support for promotion that I was telling you just a few minutes ago, and it's really difficult to reach other platforms. Here we have mainly the theatrical release. Netflix and all the VOD platforms are starting to work within the population, and for the most part, we only have this big shot with a theatrical release. I would like you to put on the producer's shoes of a Colombian producer and tell me what would you do with a film in order to surpass these barriers, to get through the distribution of the film. Donald.
Donald?
I'm going to answer it with a statement and a question first. Filmmaking is a creative art. It's also a collaborative art, meaning not one person paints the picture or sculpts the statue. It's also a business. And I can't feel good about sitting here and talking to nuestra amigos if I don't remind you that making a film today is much easier than writing a screenplay or than distributing the film when it's finished. So those are 2 points as a beginning to an answer to Santiago's question. The first 2 things is you've got to have a great story, a good guion, and secondly, you've got to plan on distribution that you're involved with. And as Paul said, when you're starting and pre-production and production and post-production, you now have to plan on more time. After the film is wrapped and edited and finished, you have to really plan on traveling with that film in North America if you want to see a success. And if you measure success by eyeballs, people watching it, or by the revenue from the people watching it, it's not about film festivals. Film festivals is a joy in the beginning, and after that it becomes hard work, and that's not the commercial part of the journey. Now, I say to you that cinema is it's a creative business. I'd like to just go back and remind you that we're not alone. There are meetings like this around the world in the music industry and in the publishing book industry. And the film industry is following. We're the last one standing. The other two businesses have already changed forever. We still have a traditional distribution business, but for the most part, music, I can't speak again for Colombia, but in the United States, if you want to buy what's called a CD, there's almost no place that you can walk in the streets and buy one. It's digitally distributed, it's digitally downloaded. The same is true with books. It's the whole new marketplace is people are downloading books and reading books online, on the computer, on their smartphone. The same thing is going to happen and is happening with movies. So yes, we still have theaters, and I personally believe that there will always be some theaters, and that a independent film, a good independent film, should have its first stop into the North American marketplace in a theater. But that moment, that stop, is a very, very short one. And what we really need to do is be focusing with your participation, your hard work on the digital channels and on the cable channels and on online sales of DVDs until, as I said, that dies.
All right, so if I'm a Colombian producer, and so basically you have to work with what you have. If I have a film that I've just finished, you know, I'm going to do what I just said. I'm going to submit it to all the top tier festivals and see what happens, and ride that wave if I can. If not, I'm going to really question about, you know, there are many ways. There are many ways. Then it becomes sort of a cost, you know, benefit analysis or an opportunity cost analysis. Like, are you going to, how much time and effort are you going to spend trying to distribute the film elsewhere? I think for the most part, if you find yourself going, another way to potentially distribute a film is to create if you have a relationship with an aggregator, and there's some aggregators, and when I mean aggregator, I mean sort of a digital aggregator, somebody who, because iTunes and Hulu and all these digital platforms in the US don't want to go out and make single deals with everybody. They want to deal with aggregators. They want to deal with certain companies that are aggregating titles. So you can make a deal.
A wholesaler.
A wholesaler. So you want to make a deal, if you have a relationship with one of those aggregators, then why not put your movie up there, but give it some thought. Like maybe perhaps one way to do it is you know, for a lot of these films in the US, the festival circuit is a distribution circuit for these movies. They go from one festival to the next in the US, and they get written about, hopefully, in their local papers. And if you can go digitally off the back of a festival circuit, that's one way to do it. I'm going to be, for the most part, I'm making movies in Colombia, so I'm going to be spending more time on hopefully the distribution in Colombia, because I want to make more movies in Colombia. And at some point, I'm going to be, okay, it's on to the next. There's diminishing returns on how much time and energy I'm putting into this, in distributing the movie in foreign places. Unless, of course, and this is something, I have a question for the audience too. I don't, like, does a big New York Times review mean anything to somebody, to the business in Colombia? You know what I mean? Obviously, when you release a movie in the US and it does well, when a movie's released in the US, it does well, it does have some significance to other markets around the world, other territories around the world. But if it's not going to be gangbusters, you know what I mean? If you're not going to be like, you're not going to be that one movie that that the Variety is talking about every other week because it surpasses another milestone. You know, does it do anything? Does it enhance any of the, the DVD business, the ancillary business here in Colombia? You know,
that's where you have to have some creativity and start looking for another ways to promote your films if you're going to do only on digital. I mean, if you're going to take that approach to your film.
Well, certainly, like perhaps a good New York Times review. It's one of the best publications in the world, and people respect it. Maybe that would mean something to a digital aggregator here or to an audience here. But I'd really question that. I'd really wonder if, that would be one thing that I would wonder how much effort am I going to put into it.
If I'm a Colombian producer and you ask me the question before I start the project, I guess I would be thinking again in 2013, how and what and where do I want to go with this project that I'm going to be involved with for the next 2+ years. And one of the things as a Colombian producer that I would be thinking about, which you might want to consider in the future, is how much money and time, as Paul said, how much commitment am I going to make to this project, and what am I expecting in a return? And the laws of economics, which have some relationship also in the film world, is if you produce a film for 100 pesos, in order to make that film at the end of the day pay for itself, you know that you have to earn 101 pesos to make $1 or 1 peso of profit. So if the film is going to have a budget of $200,000 or $500,000, again, I think we're talking about under $1 million. If you have as one of your requirements or one of your concerns is, how is this film going to make money in Colombia and in the export market? Please remember that the cost in has to try to be repaid by the income that comes back. And that's certainly something that I would be thinking about as a Colombian producer. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but that's important. The second thing I would be thinking about is, who is my audience for my story? And if I have a thought that this is an international film or a story that should be welcomed in the international markets, I might try to, in the beginning, partner with a North American co-producer. I would try to find some kind of an association with a European or a North American partner that would help me, once the film is finished, find the audience and market it. And I would know this way before I finished my film.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you bring up a good point, is if plan A doesn't work for you, do not look to the US as a money-making venture. You know what I mean? It's not, you're not going to make a lot of money distributing your film in the US by yourself, for the most part. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen. And even, even with plan A, you're probably not, after everybody takes their fees and after P&A expenditures and all that, you're still, at least you have a movie that, you might get some money back, and you have a movie that's prestigious and perhaps nominated for an Oscar or, sort of whatever.
Paul and I have some differences of opinion on, let's say, the value to a Colombian producer of a North American market or the North American theatrical release to get you to the real market, which is the digital online cable market. I have, in the last 6-8 months, had 2 experiences that I'd like to mention that I think is another valuable consideration as part of a strategy. If you look at the North American market for your Colombian film as part of a journey, and that your real opportunity is still going to be perhaps in Europe, where the market is different and money can be made, a theatrical release in New York or in certain American cities, which I think is probably New York and Los Angeles, in a qualified, good theater with good reviews and a reasonable box office for 1 week, when you go to try to get your film distributed in Europe, the distributors will look at the success of that film in the critical sense and in the box office, and might, and I'd like your opinion, Paul, might get you a higher value in the sale of your film in certain European markets.
I would just say that I think that for the most part, by the time the movie is distributed in the States, that window is passed in Europe. And look, I just took a full-time job at Sundance, and I was a distributor, and so I am a little bit pessimistic about and I'll tell you how pathetic it is. You know,
here's where we disagree. It's not as pathetic, although he's the one who's experiencing it.
All right, so, you know, I've distributed on my own, you know, maybe 10 films in 2 years, and I have a deal at Warner Brothers for distribution. By far, you know, we have this thing called cable and satellite VOD in the States. I don't think you have it here, but it's when you go on your cable channel, Comcast, one of the major carriers, and the big one, by far Comcast is the biggest one, and then there's Time Warner and so forth, and you can go on a pay-per-view sort of place and sort of look for the title. That is at least 20 times, still 20 times the revenue, for the most part. Again, it depends on your audience, but for the most part, it's 20 times the revenue of digital platforms. That is iTunes, Hulu, and everything all together. It is so antiquated. You know, the servers that these cable companies have been around for a long time. It takes forever to go through these things. That, and I was one of the biggest abusers of this. But some of the movies that have worked best for us, and I'll just name one called 8, The Mormon Proposition, which is about Prop 8 in California and the Mormon Church's involvement in getting Prop 8 passed. I mean, it's a good movie. It really makes you angry, whatever. When I was watching that movie, one of the reasons I bought it was because it started with the number 8. And because that system's so antiquated, it's at the top of the list. And that's where people aren't getting to the second page because it's so friggin' boring to try to find the movie. Unless you know exactly what you're looking for, there's no way to peruse, you know, that kind of thing. The cable companies have just come down on everybody for what I'm talking about, which is alpha stacking. You know, like people would change the title of their movies to begin with an A, so it would be at the top of that list. And even then, you're talking about a small percentage of, you know, of the gross. So I mean, it's you know, within 5 years, when you know you have a monitor that's hooked up to your computer, and you can search for whatever you want, download it, what you want, sort of like this sort of Apple TV type of thing, except more democratic, and just like, you know, you can, it's sort of like how Netflix is too. I mean, that's going to be when, I mean, the cable VOD thing will be out of business. They'll never catch up. They'll never, their antiquated system will be over, and it'll be, and movies like, and places like iTunes will surpass cable and satellite VOD. But even on iTunes now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of movies, and I've had movies that I've distributed in 50 markets that still You know what I mean? Like, they still don't. And we have this thing called distribute day and date. So I work my ass off trying to find exhibitors that will play the movie, open the movie the same day that that I can put it on iTunes and cable VOD and all those things. And then I just have one marketing spend, and hopefully people can find it any way they want to watch the movie. They can watch the movie. Still, it's a pretty. It's the DVD market is declining so dramatically that it's just, there's no way for this other side of this other ancillary market to make up for the business. You know what I mean? And I think, where we disagree is just that I feel like you just can't count on putting a movie in a theater anymore and thinking that it necessarily matters. You know what I mean? It does. It certainly. It looks good. You can certainly say my film was distributed in the U.S. You might have hopefully you have a great New York Times review. But I'll tell you another thing. I mean, the reviews, unless they feel there's a lot of marketing behind it and a lot of big push behind it, you get small reviews too. So they're not like, you know, we've had movies that have gone on, you know, full page things because they're great news topics, but nobody wanted to go see the movie. You know what I mean? So I'm a little, okay, I think things will work out. I mean, there are companies that 10 years ago were started to solely focus on Latin American, you know, like Maya releasing. You know them? You remember that? You know, they I don't know if they're still around. You know, they didn't really find, you know, they never really found the core audience there. So it's tough. I'm just like, if you don't have that, like, if you don't have that sort of A plan, you have to give it some hard thought. I don't mean don't do it. I'm just saying, like, just think about, don't spend a year and a half of your life doing it at the expense of making your next movie. That makes no sense.
There is not a question here of optimism or pessimism, and I think I heard Paul say
I'm pessimistic.
A little pessimistic. So, and I don't want to be the optimist, and he is not the pessimist. What I do want to say, because I want you to feel that you're getting something valuable from the optimism and the pessimism, is realism. And the realism that I hope you're hearing is that there is, for the rest of our lives, there's going to be a need for society in Colombia and in the rest of the world to have access to good content. Content is not going to disappear. And that's the job that we all have as filmmakers, is to create this content that audiences in some fashion, whether it's with a technology that we don't even know about today, or the technologies that we know about and how they're going to become more accessible, manageable, controllable, influenced by people, professionals, so that we can get an audience to watch something on a digital platform. All these things, we do agree, the field is in motion. It's not standing still. The solutions are being found, they're being tweaked, they're being changed. But don't stop dreaming about making a good film. There's an audience for every good film, and by working with professionals and by thinking before you make your film what the future of that film can be, what you want the future of the film to be for you, there is an opportunity to keep making films. The audience will be looking for good films, and I believe, not as the optimist, but as a realist, that if, as in any product, if you're a restaurant owner or manufacturing this table, if it costs you too much to make that table, you're never going to be able to sell it and make money. So when you're making your film, your budget has to be in keeping with the potential income. But don't stop making films. And I'll be there, hopefully for a long time, with the help of Paul, to get your film into an audience.
Okay. I want to also be a little optimistic here because what you said is right. I mean, the good thing that's happening is that it used to be like you have a film that you had to go to art house theaters, and there were only a handful of those. Your movie would never reach smaller towns. Now, anybody, anywhere in the U.S. can watch your movie, and there is a thirst for good movies. In Canada. Whatever. No, I'm just kidding. But in, like in Peoria, like Iowa, wherever, you can, people can download your movie on iTunes and watch it. That is a great and powerful thing. It's just right now, the movie business is on this precipice, afraid it's going to go the way of the music business. And not really, which, by the way, I love distribution, and the reason I took this sort of sidestep at Sundance is because I want to see how this sort of works out. I certainly love films, love filmmakers. That's what I do mostly right now, is nurture up-and-coming filmmakers at our screenwriting labs. So I think the future is bright. I think that what's going to have to happen is an answer to how people find these movies is that there's a lot of competition, not only from like the Hollywood films that are being distributed and the 20 independent films that are distributed every weekend, but from television, which is pretty great in the States right now, in Canada, and as well as video games, everything. There's just competition for your entertainment, and people stopped listening to reviewers a while ago. I think more and more that's going to come back. People are going to start listening to more and more to reviewers. There's going to be more like curatorial places to go to find movies, and I think that will be partially an answer to what is the problem with the movie business right now. But I do think, the fact that you can watch these movies anywhere is great. It's fantastic. And basically a lot of the movies, let's face it, a lot of the movies that we're talking about, which are sort of art house movies, yes, much better experiences on the big screen, but they don't have to be viewed that way, particularly when you have, widescreen HD TVs at home, and, they can be enjoyed that way as well. So,
okay, so that leaves the producer with the
hope in the long term.
Yeah, well, well, no, I'm not going to talk anymore because I'm a little bit nervous. I'm going to give the audience the word.
Questions, come on.
So, luces, porfa, aquí para el público. Tenemos una aquí y luego vamos allá. Una y luego ella.
Hi, how are you? I was just wondering, well, of course, we all want to have our movies in big theaters and as you talked as the plan A. And we also know how difficult that is and how many resources we need to make that happen. And I was thinking about your question, Santiago, about the advice for a Colombian producer right now for distribution. And I was thinking, would it be more logical or more practical to use the new platforms being invented and reinvented to achieve that plan A? So perhaps that plan A would turn into the plan B, and the plan B turned into the plan A. And that's my first question. And are there any examples of that happening and being successful?
Well, no, but I actually think, well, I mean, I think that's in the future too. I mean, if you, this is going way back and showing my age, but there was a movie that John Dahl directed. Do you remember this movie with? Climbing on a Fence? No, it was basically, it was he made it for Showtime. It screened on Showtime. It did so well that it went into the film forum. Then it was distributed theatrically, right? It had Linda Fiorentino, Bill Pullman. It was a great film. But anyway, but it was you know, it was a good kind of noirish thriller. I don't remember, but so that's what I was thinking about that the other day. There was an example of a movie that I kind of want to distribute, but called Gaby, which is a terrible title, but it's a gay themed film about a gay guy living in Brooklyn with his best friend who's a girl, and they decide they want to have a baby, you know. And that movie opened in November, I think, last year, and maybe made $30,000, which isn't the worst. It's not good, but it's not like the worst thing. But I would say that was an unsuccessful theatrical release, obviously, for a movie with a built-in gay audience. That movie last week or 2 weeks ago became, I think, the third biggest comedy on iTunes in the States. I mean, that's behind like Hangover and, you know what I mean? So whether a movie like that can then jump back into theaters, it's possible. I think that the win, though, is it's already like gotten up there at iTunes, which is another, you know, which I wanted to find out what they did, if anything, to make that happen. Because again, this is an example of not necessarily a theatrical release leading to a great ancillary result. You know what I mean? This is not something that worked in the theater that well, but it did hit that, it found its audience on iTunes.
I like your question very much, and I think I heard a deeper part of the question that I'd like to touch on. Can Plan B become Plan A? Okay. And you said some very interesting things that I'd like to just add to with respect to that statement. If you think about music and all of the people who are bands and singers and how they used to make a record, and then they would go to a record label and a record distributor, and they would then depend on that business to take their music out to the marketplace through all of the traditional ways that it was done for 50 or 60 years. Well, the same with books. Again, bookstores are disappearing in America. Books are not disappearing, but bookstores are. So it's how are people who are writing books getting the book? Okay. Now we're back to B versus Plan A. We both agree, thank God, that there are these 6, 7 major distributors still around: Sony Picture Classics, Fox Searchlight, Miramax, Weinstein, Lionsgate, etc. But they didn't get created more or less yesterday or today. They've been around for a long time, and due to their quality, their size, their success, and their bank book, they are still in business, and they're Plan A. But if you take your question, which I find really interesting, and if Plan A works, and we go to them, and Sony Picture Classics picks up our picture, depending on the size of the picture, but they picked it up. The future of that picture, Paul, is not in the theater. So they're going to open it in not 4,000 screens, but maybe in 4 cities or 5 cities. It'll be a theatrical release with Sony Picture Classics. You can't get better than that. But immediately after its relative short time in the theater, what Paul said about the good news in Iowa, you can see a film made in Bucaramanga. Well, think about it. Once it's out of the theater, and I'm speaking for myself, anybody who would work with us, we don't need Sony Picture Classics anymore, because the marketplace has become efficient, and that technology and the audiences can meet your content in ways that we don't need Miramax or Sony Picture Classics or Fox Searchlight to help us with. So in fact, the world is changing, and the middleman or the distributor, in my opinion, is disappearing, and now it's becoming film to audience with professional assistance along the way. And I think that that's wonderful. I am happy that I am not a traditional distributor, because I think my life would be in danger. But if I am a filmmaker, my audience is not disappearing, and now it's a question of what's the right way to get to my audience, and pardon me, I don't need Sony Picture Classics. What I need them for is they're going to give me money up front. And that's probably going to be the last money that I ever see from that film. They might make a lot of money, but I'm not going to make very much more. And in self-distribution, you own the film mostly or entirely for the rest of its life, and you, instead of getting a payment up front to go away, you get a payment, hopefully, for the rest of your life.
I'm sorry, just 1 second. I want to add one more thing is, I asked this because you were so adamant in the audience, the importance of the audience and knowing what audience you're directing to when you make a film. So I was wondering also that perhaps the best way to understand the life of a movie is like throwing it to the audience and in a certain way detecting what audience is receptive to that movie. And that happens in internet, that happens in so many other platforms, that you wouldn't be able to understand that dynamics if you were to release it like at once, or trying to release it at once in a theatrical major way. So perhaps while you can in a way put it on the internet, in other platforms, you can understand what audiences are more receptive to the movie before you can make that big jump.
But that's I mean, that's what I think, I was saying in the beginning, like before you even make the film, you have to sort of think about who your audience is and how are you satisfying that audience with the movie. To refer to like the question about plan A, plan B, I mean, I think that there are two parallel distribution paths for independent film in the States right now. One is plan A, one is Sony Classics, Searchlight. These movies that distribute like they've always distributed movies for the most part. They're platform releases. They have ancillary windows that are far apart. They don't, they don't do day and date theatrical releases. They do their DVD later. They do their iTunes later. That thing, and that works. That works if you have, you have the money to buy the best obviously commercial movies and to put the P&A behind them. The plan B that I think you're talking about, I still think that Gaby is one of those, I think that that's what we're still trying to work out. Is that like, how can you make that work in your favor? You're right, the 100% is finding your audience, and how do you find your audience? And so it's 100% marketing, knowing, or making a movie that you know how to find, that you know how to reach that audience in the most effective, cost-effective and time-consuming way, time-efficient way. I mean, I would think that, I don't know about what made Gaby like a huge hit on iTunes. My bet is that it had it had a gay festival run, and had a lot of good word of mouth from that. They did some sort of push for iTunes that just finally, and that teaches me a lesson about the day and date releasing, because I've done many of those, and as attractive as that seems, because I'm spending one marketing spend across all platforms, I don't think people are ready for it. I think people, you miss that person that weekend, you don't get the second bite of the apple when you release it later on iTunes. You know what I mean? So I think that It's how do you navigate these new platforms? And right now, people are experimenting, and nobody has the right model. And I think so. The short answer to the question is no. I mean, nobody's really done it to that extent. There may be some more other than Gaby, but if you want to include that as like as an example of as a good plan B, and I would, then I think that there's something to study in that model.
I also, listening to your answer, triggered an interesting moment. Last October or November, Plan B for somebody became Plan A. And what I mean there is they were going in the festival route in 2011 and 2012, trying, dreaming, hoping that they were going to get picked up by Plan A. At the end of the day, it didn't happen, and they were very, very clever. It had nothing to do with me or the QUADFLIX. They came to the QUADFLIX program, and they expected to get exceptional reviews and a good box office. And the reviews come out, all the films open on a Friday. The reviews came out on the Friday, and on Monday they got 2 phone calls from some Plan A people with the following story. I wasn't on the phone, but this is what I heard. Hey, Pedro, how are you? We've been so busy, and I promised you I'd get back to you 6 months ago, and your thing is sitting on my desk, and it's Monday, and I want to talk to you. Mierda. That's not what really happened. What really happened is they saw the reviews, they saw the box office, and they said, wow, there's an audience. Wow, and then they made a very inexpensive gesture of they'll now take the film, and the people said, no, thank you.
It's rare, but that does happen.
Totally rare, but it's an example of B and A working together.
Ok, aquí había una pregunta y luego vamos acá.
Hi, I was wondering if I could get an advice from you, because I'm like in this situation that I just don't know how to handle right now, because I recently was in the short film corner in the Cannes Film Festival, and I had my short film there, which is an adaptation of a feature film that I'm trying to finish because it's in post-production. But the thing is that I have submitted this short film in many festivals, but I haven't had a reply yet from the festivals, because they give it in August or something. But this short film corner buyer, he was interested in the short film. So I don't know really what to do first, because I already submitted it to the festivals, right? But I don't know how the right owning stuff works. So I don't know if I should sign the contract, because I don't know if I can still make it to the festivals, or I don't really know what to do right now. So what comes first?
You're talking about if you sell your short film, that this buyer has no rights to your feature, right? I mean, even though it's the same subject matter or whatever.
Okay, not even if I use the same images, because it's an adaptation. I use original images.
Right, but are you free to use those for the feature and everything? That's what I'm getting at. If you can be able to continue making your features with no restrictions whatsoever, sell your short film. Okay. It's not going to, any buyer of your short film is going to want it to play as many festivals as possible. And so, and there's not much to do with short films, so you're in a good position. I don't know the specifics, but I would be very, I'd be very hesitant to walk away from a short film buyer, because it's just...
Take the money and run.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm not sure if he's gonna pay for the short film, because I was hoping that he could pay for the short film, and then I could afford the feature film. No, but at the same time, here's the thing. He's not gonna pay for the short film, right?
What's he gonna do with it?
He's gonna broadcast it on the digital platforms that you're talking about, which I think, I'm just realizing that it might be a really good idea, because of everything that you actually said about the digital platforms and stuff, on iPads and stuff. But I don't know, because I think that the short film it has a lot of production value that I think the festivals might really appreciate. So it's not like he's gonna give me money, but I'm gonna get like maybe a really good broadcast. I don't know.
Which might make making your feature easier.
The broadcasting.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a successful short, you know, then you have a feature based on it, it might make the making of that feature easier for you, for finding financing or what have you. You know what I mean? There's already a proven audience for the subject matter in the short film version. I mean,
we can talk more after the questions.
It's a leap, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk to you after.
Thank you very much. I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Voy a aprovechar también para hacer la cuña, una cosita rápida. Aquí afuera están los confesionarios de la Dirección Nacional de Derecho de Autor, también pues ya para la parte un poquito más legal. For the legal part, there's the National Direction of Right, the Copyright, para que les hagas la consulta también. Entonces, y bueno, todos invitados también a visitarlos. Adelante.
Okay, I'm from Europe, so in Europe the plan A looks a little bit different. First, in Europe, the plan A is to get your film financed by public institutions before you even release it. So that's
same as here.
Same as here, obviously. So let's say the pressure for distribution is a bit less than in the US. What I was wondering at, and that's my question, is in Europe, if you go for distribution, the first step in plan A is always go to world sales. To the world sales, so you would go to Match Factory, Wild Bunch, and all the rest of it. Not only because they can serve the markets better probably than you do, but also they have the relations to the festivals. So for example, I don't know, last year, all 5 big festivals, I think with the exception of Sundance, had at least 3 films of the Match Factory. So it's a good way to kind of move into plan A. And this part was missing, so I just was wondering, isn't it important for the US?
You're right, that was an omission. I mean, I think that you want, at the same time, at the same time, you know, you can, if you have an into a sales agent, you know, I know Michael Weber, I'm not sure that, you know, him having the movie makes Sundance more likely. You know what I mean? He is somebody we go to a lot to see what he has. I say you can apply to festivals and go to sales agents at the same time. But I think that, you know, if you found a world sales agent, you're in good shape as well. You know, that's the first, that's again, for another, you know, American buyer or buyers elsewhere, that's obviously a really good sign, is that you have a sales agent that wants to distribute the film.
Bueno, we run out of time, so thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Gracias a ustedes por la paciencia. Y bueno, nos vemos en 20 minutos para la siguiente charla con Nick Fishman y Michelle Rubin sobre coproducir con Canadá. Entonces, gracias de nuevo.